Let's start today with a rather strange fact about the human nervous system.
Oh, okay. Hit me.
So, if you take a person out of a noisy environment and put them into a completely silent space, like an anechoic chamber, their brain doesn't actually shut down to match the quiet.
Right. It does the exact opposite, doesn't it?
Exactly. The auditory cortex basically turns up its internal volume knob. You actually start hearing the blood rushing through your own veins.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That sounds intense.
It is. Your baseline for what counts as an event completely shifts. Like a tiny pin drop suddenly registers as this massive, jarring intrusion. And that neurological quirk is actually the perfect entry point for what we're unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way.
Thanks for having me. And that mechanism is fascinating because it perfectly mirrors the literary mechanics we're analyzing today.
It really does. So for you listening, today we have a single source, and it's a book you're likely already very familiar with, The Keeper of Pelham Point.
A total classic for sure.
Yeah, but we're going straight past the basic plot summaries today. I mean, we know the story, we know Elias Wren is the lighthouse keeper, we know Mira is the botanist renting the cottage down the lane.
Right. The mission of this deep dive isn't just to, recount a summer romance.
Exactly. Our mission today is to deconstruct this text as an absolute masterclass in atmospheric storytelling. We really want to tear down the engine of this book and look at the actual pistons and gears.
Which is no small feat.
Not at all.
Yeah.
We want to know how the author manufactures such profound emotional weight and narrative momentum without relying on a single moment of high-stakes melodrama. There's no betrayal, no artificial cliffhangers.
And that is the defining challenge of the slow burn narrative. I mean, it is incredibly difficult to build a story entirely out of stillness.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, most modern storytelling relies on this constant IV drip of dopamine, right? Explosions, arguments, rapid-fire dialogue. Taking all of that away is super risky. The author has to completely rewire the reader's expectations, and they do it by relying heavily on what we can call the architecture of solitude.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we even look at Elias and Mira's dynamic, we really have to look at the structural foundation the author builds.
The setting, exactly.
Yeah, the setting of Pelham Point isn't just a picturesque coastal backdrop. It functions almost like
that sensory deprivation chamber we talked about earlier.
Yes, that's exactly it. The text spends pages detailing the physical reality of the lighthouse. It's over 100 years old, the white walls are softened by salt wind, there's that low hum of the warming lamp.
And the heavy iron gears that need winding. It operates like a metronome.
A metronome, yes.
That word is actually crucial there. If you notice how the author constructs the sentences in those early chapters, they are long, rhythmic, and highly focused on the repetitive mechanics of Elias's work.
Right. His history there is so tied to it. He's been there 6 years, ever since he took over the logbooks from his dad, right?
Exactly. When his father's hands grew, quote, too unsteady for the climb, the rhythm of the place literally lived in his bones.
Which slows the reader's heart rate down to match Elias's pacing.
Precisely. When a character's daily life is stripped down to nothing but the hush that settled over the cliffs, their psychological threshold for novelty is completely different.
I see that, but let me throw an analogy at you. I initially compared Elias's job to a modern, always-on server administrator, or maybe a 911 dispatcher.
Okay, I can see where you're going with that.
Right, because you are the critical point of failure. If you mess up, things go dark and people die. But as I look closer at the text, that analogy falls apart entirely.
Yeah, it really does.
Because the dispatcher is constantly reacting to crises, right?
Yeah.
Elias's job asks for nothing but absolute physical presence. He doesn't react to the ships react to him.
Right.
It's basically a state of passive vigilance.
Yeah, passive vigilance is the perfect term for it. I mean, it speaks to a very specific type of human duty. He isn't saving ships by swimming out to them. He is saving them by simply remaining illuminated.
Which takes a lot of mental fortitude.
An immense amount of internal stability, yeah. And that stability is what allows the author to make a tiny detail feel monumental.
Like the smoke from the cottage.
Exactly. Because Elias lives in a baseline of solitude, the thin gray ribbon of smoke rising from Mira's chimney in late June isn't just a detail. well, it's a structural disruption. It's the pin drop in your anechoic chamber.
But I want to push back heavily on how we typically read characters like this, though.
Oh, how so?
Well, we've been conditioned by a century of literature to view the lonely lighthouse keeper as this big trope. We expect the brooding, damaged hermit who retreated from the world because of trauma, right?
Yeah, the guy who desperately needs to be rescued by a vibrant outsider.
Exactly. But I struggle to find any evidence in the text that Elias is actually broken. He explicitly notes in his logbook, "I've never minded my own company much." Isn't it possible he's just genuinely content?
Well, I wouldn't call it pure contentment so much as a settled equilibrium. But you are touching on the exact reason the romance in the story works so beautifully.
Right, because it's not a rescue mission.
Exactly. The author actively subverts the rescuer dynamic. If Elias were desperate for human connection, any interaction would feel like a life raft. It would feel, codependent.
Right, it would just be dependency, not real romance.
But because he is grounded in his own identity, and his solitude is a choice rather than a punishment, the connection with Mira becomes additive.
It's two whole people, rather than two fractured halves trying to complete each other.
Which fundamentally changes the mechanics of how they have to meet.
Oh, definitely. Because Elias is so deeply anchored to his physical environment, he isn't going to wander into town to find a spark.
Right.
The disruption of his physical space is the only natural way to initiate a relationship.
So we move from the vast vertical isolation of the lighthouse to a very specific horizontal shared space.
The wild lavender field, which is exactly halfway between the lighthouse and the village.
The spatial geography here is doing a massive amount of narrative work. The author uses geographical necessity to foster this completely unhurried connection.
Right, they don't have to bravely ask each other out on a formal date, which carries a huge risk of rejection.
No, they just happen to occupy the same transit route. Elias starts fetching bread and his paper more frequently just to walk past her.
And the initial meeting in that field is brilliant because it entirely bypasses performative social behavior.
She's sketching the curve of a stem, right?
Yeah, she's kneeling in the dirt, studying coastal flora for a book she calls Half Botany and Half Memory. And she has this smear of pencil graphite along her jaw that she's completely unaware of.
I love that detail.
Me too. In our era of highly curated personas, that graphite smear is an emblem of radical unself-consciousness. She isn't performing for an audience.
And her first line to him perfectly establishes her boundaries. She doesn't apologize. She doesn't look up with coy interest. She just says, "You're standing in my light."
I love that line. It's literal because he is casting a shadow on her notebook, but it's deeply metaphorical too.
How so?
Well, here is the literal keeper of the light, the man whose entire existence revolves around providing illumination, and he is inadvertently blocking hers. So he steps aside.
Oh, right.
And that small physical movement sets the rules of engagement for their entire relationship. It's about making space, not demanding attention.
Which raises an important question about the psychology of their routine. They start having these quiet conversations about mundane things that act as proxies for deeper intimacy.
Like talking about the birds or the weather.
Yeah, or the sea fog. Elias tells her that when it's thick, you have to trust the sound of the waves more than your eyes.
Which is such an obvious yet incredibly effective metaphor for navigating the unknown parts of a new relationship. You can't see the future, so you have to feel your way through it based on the subtle feedback you're getting. You have to listen.
Absolutely. But notice how the author handles the concept of desire here. It's completely understated.
Yeah, it relies on plausible deniability.
Exactly. As long as Elias has a chore, he doesn't have to admit to himself that he is actively seeking her out.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. During one of these low-stakes conversations, Elias mentions that out on the point, you just get used to the quiet, and you get used to the waiting.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Right. And Mira asks him, point blank, "What are you waiting for?" And he's caught totally off guard. He says, "I suppose I haven't decided yet."
That line is the absolute linchpin of Elias's character arc.
It really is. I think it perfectly captures a very specific human condition. You can be functional, You could be productive. You could even be relatively happy tending to your daily gears and logbooks.
But you're still subconsciously holding yourself in a state of suspended animation.
Yes, waiting for an unknown variable to arrive. You're waiting, but you don't know what for until it suddenly drops into your lap.
And this is where the author proves their mastery of pacing. Routine is comfortable. We could read 300 pages of them just chatting in the lavender field.
I mean, I probably would read that.
Sure, but psychologically speaking, moving a relationship from casual proximity to genuine vulnerability requires a catalyst.
Something to force the issue.
Exactly. It requires an external pressure to force an internal realization. And the author uses a massive shift in the weather to do this, the August storm.
Oh, the build-up to this storm is incredible. It's just a masterclass in tension. The text describes 2 days of heavy yellow air. The gulls are flying lower, calling sharply.
Elias goes into full lockdown mode, checking every bolt on the lantern twice.
But I really want to look at how this storm functions structurally. Because usually when you introduce a massive storm in a novel, it represents chaos. If you look at Shakespeare or the Bronte sisters, a storm is a manifestation of internal madness, or it's a disaster that forces characters into a state of panic and survival.
What's fascinating here is how the author completely inverts that literary trope. The storm in The Keeper of Pelham Point is not a threat to Elias and Mira.
Well, consider the contrast the author sets up. It's not a threat at all. It's an insulator.
Yes.
Before the rain breaks, Mira arrives breathless at the lighthouse and asks to watch the storm from the lantern room. They climb those spiral stone stairs and they step into the glass room. And the text describes the feeling inside that space as the inside of a held breath.
It's a brilliant inversion. The storm raging outside highlights the absolute safety of the space inside.
Yeah, that contrast is so stark.
You have the dark, chaotic, violent water of the ocean crashing below, and in the center of it all, you have the single, patient, steady beam of the lamp.
And the two of them standing shoulder to shoulder.
Right. The author has effectively placed them in a pressure cooker of intimacy, entirely separated from the rest of the world.
But I want to question the dynamic in that room. They watch a familiar fishing boat fighting its way home. Mira asks Elias if it frightens him to be the one everyone relies on in the dark.
And his answer is so telling.
He replies that it's just work. You do it carefully, and you trust that it's enough. And then he realizes he has reached for her hand without deciding to.
Yes.
I read that initially and thought, wait, where did the hand-holding come from? It almost felt like a jump in their progression.
I would argue it's not a jump at all. It's the inevitable physical manifestation of shared responsibility.
How you mean?
Well, tending the light is Elias's burden. By asking that question, Mira isn't just making small talk. She is acknowledging the emotional weight of his existence. She is stepping into his reality.
So she is sharing the psychological load of the watch.
Precisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author is drawing a direct, unbreakable parallel between the courage it takes to guide a ship through a storm and the courage it takes to tend to a new relationship.
Because both are terrifying.
It is terrifying to be the one someone relies on. Vulnerability is a huge risk. But Elias's philosophy applies to both. You do the work carefully, and you trust that it's enough.
That's beautiful.
He reaches for her hand because, for the first time in 6 years, he isn't standing watch alone.
And she lets him keep her hand. No grand declarations, no dramatic music swelling in the background, just a silent agreement in the face of the storm.
And surviving this catalyst shifts their dynamic permanently.
Right, they move from an accidental open-air summer routine to a confined, shared space. And this internal shift is beautifully mirrored by the shift of the seasons into autumn.
The changing of the seasons is the final architectural piece of this narrative. We move into September, the time of harvest.
Right.
The sensory details the author uses here are vital. The wild lavender they met over is finally cut. It is dried and bundled into soft gray sheaves that hang from the rafters of Mira's cottage.
So what does this all mean? The drying of the lavender isn't just a quaint farming detail. Think about what the botanical process represents.
Preservation.
Exactly. You take something that bloomed in the wild, exposed to the summer elements, and you intentionally bring it indoors to preserve it. You are capturing a fleeting season so it can last through the harshness of winter.
It's the literal preservation of warmth and memory.
And you see this preservation reflected in their shifted habits. The light is falling earlier, turning that deep, late autumn gold.
And Elias's walks down the cliff path are no longer hidden behind the plausible deniability of fetching bread.
No, Mira is actively setting out 2 cups instead of 1. The casualness is gone, and it has been replaced by intentionality.
Which leads to this beautiful observation the author makes about the nature of their connection. The text notes that their comfort doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It simply settles in, like warmth into a room once the fire has been lit a while.
That sentence alone justifies the entire slow burn pacing of the book.
It really does. It validates the reader's patience. The climax of this story isn't a dramatic rescue or a passionate argument in the rain.
No. Near the end of September, Mira climbs the lighthouse stairs alone. She knows the steps now. She stands beside Elias in the steady lamp and simply states that she might not leave for the city in the spring after all.
And Elias doesn't launch into a massive monologue.
He just takes her hand again. They stand there looking out at the water, and we are left with this incredibly evocative, lingering dual image that the author paints.
The light and the fire.
Yes. We have the unhurried beam of the lighthouse sweeping over the dark water up high, and down below, we have the low-burning fire waiting in the cottage.
The resolution of the story relies entirely on the blending of those 2 environments. Consider what those 2 light sources represent.
Okay.
The lighthouse is a vast, sweeping, outward-facing duty to the world. It is rigid and necessary. The cottage fire is an intimate, inward-facing, private sanctuary that provides soft, sustaining warmth.
And Elias only had the outward duty. He was all lighthouse, no hearth.
Exactly, and by the end, the author brings those 2 halves into balance. The vastness of the ocean and the burden of vigilance are finally balanced by the intimacy of the domestic hearth.
Neither diminishes the other. They coexist.
It really is just brilliant structural architecture from the writer.
It is. To bring this all back to you listening right now, we bypassed the simple plot today to really dig into the machinery of The Keeper of Pelham Point.
We looked at how sensory deprivation resets our emotional baseline and how spatial geography creates unhurried connection.
Right, and how the author brilliantly inverted the literary trope of the storm to forge intimacy rather than chaos. It's a masterclass in proving that you don't need explosions, toxic conflicts, or high-speed drama to make a story deeply compelling.
It also challenges our modern narrative appetites, you know?
How do you mean that?
It proves that there is immense narrative power in unhurried rhythms. In a landscape that constantly demands instant gratification and rapid progression, there is something deeply satisfying about watching a connection build simply by 2 people repeatedly showing up on the same path until one of them finally chooses to set out a second cup.
I couldn't agree more. It's a completely different way of viewing progress. So, we'll leave you with a final thought to mull over as you transition back into whatever you were doing today.
I love this part.
If the lighthouse represents our outward duties to the world, the relentless daily work we do to meet deadlines, maintain our personas, and guide the ships in our professional lives, and the cottage fire represents our internal, private sanctuaries of genuine vulnerability and rest. Of genuine vulnerability and rest. Which of those fires are you currently dedicating most of your fuel to?
That's a great question.
And more importantly, do you have someone sharing the watch?